Welcome to Manibil, and welcome to what possibly and very likely, at least, is the last main chapter of my presentation of my philosophy. And what we are ending up with, or what I will end up with presenting to you, is my moral principle. Now, I don't want to poison the well or anything like preparing you should understand it this way or that way. I hope it comes across, at least, that what I'm doing is constantly building of what I have done prior, right? So that it doesn't sort of arrive from out of the blue. But I really want you to scrutinize what I'm doing here. And if there's anything that is just remotely confusing, let me know. And I will make as many follow-ups to this presentation video as I can get away with, right? Because I don't want to fuck with this. In general, I am convinced and have been convinced of this approach for going on some 7 or 8 years. And it's like, I think what I did was, it was just an afternoon. I was doing something in my kitchen, like making a coffee or something, to that effect. And I was sort of, I was doing sort of a meta philosophy, but I was sort of saying to myself, okay, what do I need morality for? What is it for? Why are people talking about morality? Where does it fucking come from? What is the whole idea, right? And I was saying, well, how about I made a definition of morality? And thereby I sort of twisted my thinking into some new avenues, where I sort of said to myself, holy shit, by trying to define morality, I am actually formulating morality, right? And at the same time, I was also doing some Hume. And the famous quote from Hume, the Iseult quote, sort of started to roam around, right? And I was like, okay, but I think he's right. I mean, you can't just start saying shit like, that's an apple, that's a tree, that woman is going that direction, and therefore you should or shouldn't. This is just stupid argumentation, right? Though this is how basically everyone argues for ethics. It might be more or less hidden in the language, but when you take it apart and see the moving parts of the argument, this is basically what they do. They are basically bossing people around. They just put a few observations in front of that bossing around in order to sort of supposedly justify that bossing around. So what Hume ultimately led me to conclude is, and I actually think that, I believe personally that Hume would agree with me on this. And I haven't read enough of Hume. I have read quite a lot, and the big chunks of his treatise, but it's a little dense and little, it's 300-year-old language and so on, right? But I think he would agree with me if I said this, which is basically what Hume is actually appealing to. And I might add that he's not saying you can't get an ought from an is. He's not saying that you can either. But people who condense his quote into Hume is saying you can't get an ought from an is, and it's Hume's law and all guillotine and all that. They're basically misquoting him or misunderstanding his quote. But if you read the quote, what the underlying thing going on there, in my opinion, is, and this is my sort of rule, right? There's no kind of thinking. There is no abstraction you can come up with that all of a sudden allows you to boss some individuals around. I have some abstractions. Now I can boss you around. How the hell would that follow? Well, it wouldn't, right? As much as it would be nice that it followed, it doesn't follow. I can't just make up shit following from other shit, right? in order to justify what I want. What I want is not a part of my philosophy, at least only to the extent that it needs to be. And those are the axioms and so on that I have presented, right? So the ultimate thing is, as I said, there's nothing I can think that enables me to boss people around. And this has been a mantra of mine, it has been a absolute limitation that I'm making sure that I'm not venturing into that, right? So, but it's somewhat slightly complicated than that, you could say, right? Because it sounds very much like kind of, okay, so I can just sit here and wait. Not quite that bad, right? Okay, so the last step is ethics, and this is sort of the philosophy I'm doing in order to arrive at a moral principle. Sort of to cut it short, right? I call it a perfect principle because it's a principle that has to rule all other principles, right? There's nothing that overrules my perfect principle. Nothing. No other principles. It will always be highest priority under the circumstances where it has to be applied, at least, right? Okay. So, just to recapture, this was my optimized presentation of my ontology. So you can say that ontology is the categorization within the dotted line, which are my phenomena, and the way they're categorized there and shown interdependencies, which I have described in prior chapters, right? And then there's sort of another box, which is external world, and I've dealt with that and described how I approach it. And I basically say that my cognitions are representations of aspects of an external world which I do not have access to. So all I have to work with are my cognitions. And you would say, what follow from those cognitions, right? Okay, so, and I've made a few videos on this, so go back and check those if you are just jumping into this video, right? You might want to start at chapter 1 or part 1. Then we have the idea of the cognitions and more specifically knowledge. Cognitions are knowledge, but I have gone into further delineations of types of knowledge, which is objects and individuals, and then the rest of knowledge, right? So knowledge is all of it, but some of them are more sort of important, you could say, which are individuals, of which my body is in a sense one of them, though it's my body, it's my individual, so to say, right? And then there are the objects of which I have agreed on, right? I have objectified with these individuals, with this or these individuals. These are the light blue ones. These are objects because they have been objectified using objectivity, which is another part I've described, right? Okay, so we have this situation. We have this, this knowledge, right? I have this knowledge, I should say. So since I decided originally to cooperate regarding the objectification of the situation, I need to decide at this point if the objectification still makes it feasible to go further, right? To go on, to get to some further steps. Why did I do the objectification? There's sort of a purpose with me interacting with these individuals and potentially with these objects, right? So what I need to get to is what I would call perfect objectification, which is when all of my interesting knowledge is actually objectified. I think it's not grammatically correct. Is actually, there's missing an is, right? Or are, maybe are, if there's more than one, right? My interesting knowledge, yeah, and by interesting, I mean that which I want to objectify. I might have some other knowledge that I don't need to objectify, right? That I can rule that out, and I can know if these individuals have some knowledge that they have, they have that I don't have, It might be the same, it might not be the same. I can never get to that, right? Because they are a part of that external world I don't have access to, right? That is their abstractions and experiences. That's their phenomena, right? So to say. So if I have perfect objectification, I will consider further cooperation. I might still not want to do it for whatever reason. There's nothing that says I have to do it, right? I can always quit, right? Or at least I've always considered, do I need to quit now? Do I need to quit now? Do I need to quit now? And so on, right? If you don't want to cooperate, don't. Don't try to get to an agreement if you don't want to. You can always step out. In fact, I would encourage you to, actually, right? If yes, as I said, I will consider further cooperation. If not, if I don't have perfect objectification of the objects that I want to objectify, there are problems. There might be something wrong either with me and my situation or those individuals who are participating in this kind of situation, right? So I will not settle on an agreement, obviously, because we cannot get to an agreement, or it's a limited agreement that I might sort of want to reduce what I'm agreeing on, maybe, depending on the situation, right? Or I might just flee, which is a general term for, not participating, so to say, right? And you might interpret how you want to interpret what I mean by flee. But, the ultimate is running that way as fast as I can. Maybe that's not necessary, but you know what I mean, right? Or at least avoid agreement with those individuals I cannot get to perfect objectivity with. If I can get to perfect objectivity with individual one, I can make an agreement maybe with individual one and then not agree with the other ones. Or maybe just agree with what I can get objectivity with those. But it might start to get so complicated, I say, no, not for me, right? But these are sort of borderline scenarios. This will probably not be the case very often. You will probably, very likely, that's my experience, people tend to agree on most areas. Do you agree with everybody when you drive your car on the road? Do you agree with all the participants? No, you sort of take for granted that if you see a car, somebody else sees a car. And if you see your car, somebody else sees your car from the outside, and so on and so on and so on. If it's rainy, people turn on the lights or whatever it is, right? So it may sound a little more complicated here than it actually would be in an everyday scenario where ultimately my moral principle has been applied for years and years and years by everybody. Then it would just be, an everyday kind of scenario. But, it's like when you have to, if you have to move to a new place, you have to move all your shit and you have to arrange it and figure out how to put it, and what about the internet connections and the mailbox and changing all your addresses everywhere where online where somebody to get your mail to the right place and all this shit that has to be done in the beginning. But when it's settled, it's sort of more or less just keeping up with the standard, right? And not I have to put in some juice on my laptop here. Sorry about that. I had forgot I had pulled it out, right? Okay, so before I should have checked that before I started the presentation. Okay, so as I said here, if not, I will not settle on an agreement and possibly flee, or at least avoid agreement with those individuals I cannot get to a perfect objectivity with. Right? So I'm constantly making sure that I'm not venturing into something where there's sort of already a kind of disagreement, you could say, right? Okay. So, to make it even simpler, let's just say there's me and another individual, and then there are two objects, right? So a situation, it's just to make the graphics even simpler. It doesn't have to be even that complicated as it was before. So it's an apple and a pear, right? I mean, a set of individuals and objects that remains known. No, back up a bit. A definition of a situation. And this is the situation I've described in the diagram above here. The individuals, my body, and the two objects. A set of individuals and objects that remains known for me and no new ones appear. Right? So if they remain known, they don't disappear. And new ones don't appear. So it's constant, right? So if not, there is a new composition of knowledge. If another object arrive in the situation, right? I might want to say, hey, we have a new situation here. Now there's a wolf, right? We have to agree on. I mean, you might not need it, but you should sort of take it into account at least, right? If not, there is a new composition of knowledge, which has to be objectified to get to a new, possibly at least, right? To get into a new situation. Or the other one might want to do it. The other individual might think that you're trying to do something depending on that. So it's a good idea to say, oh, there's an orange here. We need to, right? So it's all up to your judgment in a way, right? But a situation is where things are constant regarding knowledge. And you might, if there's a mosquito that flies, I mean, there's a limit of importance, you could say. What's it called? In France, they call it a bagatelle, I think. It's sort of a minute thing that is, who cares, right? But it might depend, right? Okay, so let's say I've decided for cooperation. Therefore, I need to get to an agreement with the individuals on how to deal with the objects, right? We're not just going to stand there and stand there, right? So, if I can get to an agreement, we can perform in accordance with the agreement, right? Like say, the agreement is you get object 1, I get object 2. Do we agree? Yes, yes. I grab object 2, he grabs object 1, and we part ways maybe, right? Or we'll just sit there and enjoy our fruit, right? So, if I can get to an agreement, we can perform in accordance with the agreement. So it should be performative agreement, right? I constantly have to make sure I am in accordance with my agreement, or the other individual may think I'm cheating, right? So I have to sort of play with open cards in a way, you could say, right? In order to make sure that it unfolds as agreed on. But it might depend on the agreement, right? And I might have some strict understanding of what an agreement entails, and the other one might not be quite as strict, so we might not get to an agreement. But as long as we are in agreement and we're sort of performing or acting in accordance with it, it's sort of fine, right? I constantly have to make sure that the other individual or individuals are working in accordance with the agreement. Yeah, because if that other individual starts to grab my apple or whatever it was I got, right? It's sort of, no, this is not in accordance with the agreement, right? If either or both of the above are not possible at all times, a part of the agreement has to address this. Yes, so what I'm trying to get at is sort of exceptions. If something happens, it's sort of, if it's more complex than an apple and a pear, right? If it's like, over 4 years or, something like that, and 100 individuals and 1,000 objects, what if this happens? And there's some exit clauses or whatever needs to be there maybe, right? But depending on the situation and so on, right? So just to sort of cover all bases in a way, right? Okay. So agreement based on perfect objectification. Suggestions of content. I'm not going to tell you all the things you could possibly have in an agreement. But here are a few things that are sort of maybe more or less obvious, but right? There might be, depending on the situation and so on. And the future situation, right? Which is an imagination of how it could be. The present situation describes all individuals and all the objects, including their relation or placement. Yeah. So it's like, okay, I sit here, the object's there, and you're there, right? So this is how it, please stay there while we are doing the agreement, right? So don't move around and don't move shit around. Just let it be, right? So we can discuss it. Okay. So what we are trying to do is, if we want a future situation, which is might be, well, you have to bring that apple to me, and I have to go to the left and to the right with the orange or whatever it is, right? So that's a future situation because shit has started to move around, or I need to get a twig in order to whatever. So the future situation is the composition now that is placed this way and a twig. Then the objectification of the twig is necessary. And obviously you have to objectify the new situation so it's in accordance with the agreement, right? The future situation describes all new and old individuals and all the new and old objects, including their relation placement, right? So how should it look, right? If we agree that you should build a house and I hand you some money in some kind of agreement, then we have to describe what you have to present, right? Maybe it's easy for me to, well, there has to be $1 million, right? And we have to agree on how that should be placed and who should be where and what should be where, which is possibly more important, right? What should be where, how large, how big, how much, and so on, right? So the house, money, right? That's a future situation. Describes what additional objects individuals may be allowed to participate in bringing the present situation to the future situation, without necessarily being an aspect of the present and or the future situation, and how to secure that the agreement is not broken during those participations. Yeah, if you have to, well, if I have to build a house, I have to bring in the plumber and the, electrician and the, builders, whatever, right? So, and it has to be described in the agreement and so on, and they don't have to be a part of the final product. It's not like there has to be a electrician installed in the house so they go away again, so to say. It has to be agreed upon, right? And then a clock has to be used, and a deadline has to be defined for time of finalization, including possible control steps under the way, right? So intermediate, okay, we reach this point, we do this. This has to be in place. That point, we have to be, if it's not in place, what do we do, right? So on. Now, and if I'm in sort of, I don't think this is a too big project, let's call it that for me, right? It's a very large agreement and I'm not sure that I'm going to get what I need and it's not going to whatever. Don't do the agreement. Don't participate. Stay out of agreements, right? Okay, so we're coming to the last slide. Here it is. My perfect moral principle is I will act in accordance with what I agree to. There isn't more to it. That's what I'm going to do. I will act in accordance with what I agree to. If I agree to something, I will act accordingly, right? That's my moral principle. So it's embedded in the sentence somehow in a way that, well, if I didn't want to agree to it, I didn't agree to it, so I don't have to act in accordance with it, right? But if I am agreeing to something, I will act accordingly, or I wouldn't have agreed, right? So this is sort of the way I am. And what if I don't agree with somebody? I have fled from them, right? So I am on my own. I can't be immoral to something that I can't, that if there's nothing to agree on, or I haven't agreed. If there's no one to agree with, there can't be any morality involved. No. So there must be agreements in order to be morality. Otherwise, there is no morality involved, right? Okay, so to twist it around a bit, immorality to me is if I think, oh, there's a missing I there. If I think an individual does not act in accordance with an agreement it has agreed to, that's immoral to me. If some individual doesn't act in accordance with what they agreed to, that might be difficult to me to decipher. But if I am involved with some individuals in an agreement, I would have secured a way to make sure that they're actually acting accordingly, right? Or I wouldn't have agreed to it, maybe. I can always not participate in an agreement. I can always not do that, right? I can always not do that, but yeah. So my principle is I will act in accordance with what I agree to. And immorality is if somebody doesn't act in accordance with what they have agreed to. That's immoral to me. But you can see by this, I'm not saying that with an agreement that I'm agreeing to. You could have made an agreement with somebody else that I am a part of, but I can see that you're not acting in accordance with that agreement if you told me all aspects of that agreement, and then you don't act accordingly, I would say it looks like you are immoral to me, right? It might be a good idea to check up what you're doing, right? I don't think you're in accordance with it. It's not like you're immoral, but it's like, okay, it approaches something that might, be detrimental, or you're not actually acting according to my moral principle, right? I'm not saying you have to, but it's my moral principle that guides me towards what is immoral by somebody else's action. But it's only because they have agreed to it. Otherwise, there's no immorality. So it's because they're not acting in accordance with, I can't do anything about it. It's not unless they're part of an agreement I'm participating in, then I can start to say, well, there's a problem here, right? You're being immoral. So I don't want to go into too much explanation, because all of this is just to pinpoint how I think it should work. And a lot of it is up to other people also to come up with ideas of how to solidify this and improve it, and maybe come up with ideas of how to, go about doing agreements, and what to do, what not to do, and so on. So it's not like, I could suspect that some people would think that this is kind of a disappointment. I will act in accordance with what I agree to. Well, right? There's an underlying philosophy that arrives at this moral principle that points all the way back to the start of my ontology, which was my reduction base, right? So it has to point all the way back, which I believe it does. I'm convinced it does, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be sitting here presenting it to you, right? But what you might, as a takeaway, sort of a paradigm shift here, is taking into account, sort of avoiding what Hume was trying to pinpoint, which is you don't get to tell people what to do. You can say whether you want to participate or not, right? You don't get to tell people what to do. I don't get to tell anybody what to do, right? So this is the embedded in the result of what is sort of built into. It shouldn't actually be alien to anybody, this, right? Because it's kind of It's kind of free market kind of thing, if anything, right? But if you don't want to buy my carrots, don't. I mean, don't buy them. If you go into a shop and there's some shit lying around on some shelves and there's some prices, it's kind of an open agreement that if you give me this money, you can take the carrot. Right? It's sort of an agreement. If you want to, you can do it. If you don't want it, you can leave. Then don't buy it if you don't want it, right? Get the fuck out of my store. If you don't care about my, I mean, it's like I don't have to do anything, right? It's quite simple, really, right? I think it's only because of all this baggage of dogmas and, academic mindfuckery that has been inflicted on everybody. And, the hypothetical, whatever, Kant and this harebrained theorizing, which is basically all of it is bullshit, right? This is simple and approachable. Anybody can do it. Anybody who can cognize can participate, right? You might not maybe be good at making agreements, but then you'll learn, right? If you make a bad agreement and you're sort of, okay, I paid $2 million for this apple. That was quite stupid, right? I'm not going to do that again, right? So you can improve. And you can always say, I don't want to participate, right? Now, before I leave you, there's something I want you to think about also, which is you can't blame on this moral principle what has happened in situations where the principle wasn't applied. You can't tell me that, yeah, but there's a situation over there. How would you use that moral principle of yours? Well, it wasn't applied in the first place. The old situation that has evolved into a new and unwanted situation, it's too late. It's too late. Shit has happened now. It happened possibly, potentially, because the principle wasn't applied. So you can't blame the principle for not working on a situation that is a result of the principle having not been applied, right? And there's also another thing that I want to mention that this principle actually addresses, or it just comes with it as a bonus, you could say, that all moral principles I have seen are principles, except maybe for Kant, but where you have to point to that is immoral, therefore you can be punished. You should be punished, or you should be killed, or you should be this, and you should be that. Well, all moral principles or moral ideas or ethics that are based on you have to observe something that is immoral in order to act, then it's too late. You're already on the other side. The whole idea of morality is to avoid this shit happening, right? This is sort of proactive kind of morality where you make sure constantly all participators arrange it in a way that they want. If individual one wants to eat me and I'm the object, I'm going to virulently reject that agreement, right? I want to take my shit and say, fuck you, right? I'm going to, flee from that agreement. So all moral principles that are based on, well, this is theft, this is murder, this is, like Stephen Molyneux, for instance, right? It's like saying, well, murder is immoral. Yeah, God fucking damn, it's immoral, because that's the definition of murder. It's an immoral kind of killing, right? So obviously it's immoral. But you can't sit there and wait until something immoral happens in order to react. Then it's too late. It has to be this kind of proactive principle that actually takes that proactive step of arranging things in a way that inhibits immorality, because I'm actually taking charge of my own life. Everybody takes charge in this approach, right? It's sort of decentralized ethics, decentralized morality. And there's nobody who can't participate unless maybe if they're blind, or they don't have, they have no arms or whatever. But then there's somebody else who has sort of an agreement with them, maybe their parents or whatever, who takes care of them and whatever, right? So again, you can't blame this moral principle for not being applied, and then have say you can reject my principle because you can't fix something that arrived because it wasn't applied, right? So don't blame me for whatever has happened before this moral principle was applied. But now, obviously, since I presented it, now I have to live by it, right? Otherwise, I would be a fucking asshole, right? At least I'll have to try to live by it as best as I can. So, I hope you enjoyed the series. Let me have your comments. This is sort of very important for me, and I hope that you can see the significance of what I have arrived. You might disagree with me, and you might not like it. I don't care too much about what you like, but if you disagree with me because there's some major flaw in my reasoning or my approach, let me know, please, right? Because I don't want to flaunt a moral principle that is based on bad psychology, a Freudian slip, right? A bad reasoning or philosophy. So it's important that practice what you preach, right? As they say, practice what you preach. If you preach a moral principle, well, at least you can live up to your principle, right? I mean, so it's again this, maybe that's also a reason why moral principles tend to the best of my understanding, tends to be telling somebody else what to do, right? Of course, I am the philosopher, I'm perfect, right? I don't have to, I was always perfect and whatever, right? But you have to do, no. A moral principle has to be what I have to do, right? And you can adapt this principle if you think it's good, right? If you don't want to adapt it, I would like you to tell me and put it in the comments. What principle do you follow? And how did you arrive at it, right? Let me know, please. And if you don't have that, and you can't find any flaws in my reasoning, why wouldn't you adapt my principle, right? Or you're just a corrupt person, maybe. So, I give it to you straight, right? Have a nice day. See you in the next one.